The words hit me like ice water in July, standing there in my best navy dress, the one I'd saved 3 months to buy, watching my daughter accept her diploma. I never expected to hear my name echo across that auditorium in shame, but there it was, clear as day, cutting through the applause like a blade. The humiliation burned hotter than the Georgia sun beating down on the outdoor ceremony, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Margaret Chen, though most folks around Millbrook just call me Maggie. I'm 52 years old, and I've spent the last 24 years of my life making sure my daughter Jessica had everything I never did. Every sacrifice, every double shift at the textile factory, every skipped meal when the grocery money ran short, all of it was for her future. All of it was so she could walk across that stage with her head held high, diploma in hand, ready to conquer a world that had never been particularly kind to people like us. I grew up in a cramped apartment above my grandmother's bakery on the wrong side of Millbrook, where the trains rattled the windows every morning at 5:30, and the smell of yeast and flour couldn't quite mask the dampness that crept through the walls each winter. My parents worked themselves to the bone, Mama cleaning houses for the wealthy families in Magnolia Heights, Papa loading trucks at the distribution center, until his back gave out when I was 16. They never made it past 8th grade, but they understood something about education that they passed down to me like a sacred trust. School was the ladder, they'd say. The only ladder that nobody could take away from you once you climbed it. When I found out I was pregnant at 28, unmarried and working as a seamstress in Mrs. Whitman's alteration shop, I made a promise to the tiny life growing inside me. This baby would have chances. This baby would go to college. This baby would never know the ache of wanting something better and not knowing how to get it. David, Jessica's father, had other ideas about responsibility and disappeared before she took her first breath, leaving behind nothing but a forwarded address in Atlanta and a check that bounced twice. So it was just Jessica and me in that little rental house on Maple Street, with the leaky roof and the furnace that wheezed through winter like an old man with pneumonia. But we made it work. More than work. We made it sing. I'd wake up at 4 every morning to pack her lunch, always with a little note tucked inside. "You're going to shine today, baby girl. Make today count, sweetheart. Remember, you're destined for greatness." She'd roll her eyes at my sentimental scribbles, but I caught her saving every single one in a shoebox under her bed. Those early years were a blur of bedtime stories and homework battles, scraped knees and dance recitals, science fair projects that took over our entire kitchen table for weeks at a time. Jessica was brilliant. Not just smart, but brilliant in that way that made teachers stop me in the grocery store to tell me how special my daughter was. She devoured books, like other kids devoured candy, always 3 grade levels ahead in reading, always asking questions that made me scramble for answers I wasn't sure I had. When she was 12, she announced she wanted to be a lawyer. Not a teacher or a nurse, though Lord knows both are noble professions, but a lawyer. She'd watched some courtroom drama on television and declared that she was going to defend people who couldn't defend themselves. The determination in her voice, the way she jutted out her chin when she said it, reminded me so much of my own mother that I had to step outside and cry on the back porch for 5 minutes. That was the night I started the college fund. $25 from each paycheck, no matter what. When the transmission went out on my old Honda, I took the bus for 6 months instead of touching that money. When the roof started leaking so bad that I had to put buckets in the living room, I picked up weekend shifts at the diner, rather than dip into Jessica's future. That money was sacred, untouchable, growing slowly but steadily in a savings account at First National Bank. High school brought new challenges and new expenses. Academic clubs required fees. Honor Society needed special cords and pins. The debate team traveled to competitions that meant hotel stays and restaurant meals. Each time Jessica came to me with another form, another check to write, I never hesitated. Not once. Even when it meant packing peanut butter sandwiches for my own lunch for 2 weeks straight, or wearing the same 3 dresses to church until the fabric started to thin at the seams. Jessica's guidance counselor, Mrs. Rodriguez, called me in during her junior year to discuss college applications. She spread glossy brochures across her desk like a fortune teller laying out cards. Duke, Emory, University of Georgia, Georgia Tech, all expensive. All requiring test prep courses and application fees and visits that meant time off work I couldn't afford to take. But I nodded and smiled and told Mrs. Rodriguez that we'd make it work somehow. Because that's what mothers do, we make it work. The SAT prep course cost $400. I sold my mother's wedding ring, the only piece of jewelry I owned that was worth anything, to pay for it. Jessica scored in the 95th percentile. The college application fees totaled nearly $600 across 8 schools. I picked up holiday shifts at the department store, wrapping gifts for strangers until my fingers cracked from the tape and my back screamed from standing for 12 hours at a stretch. When the acceptance letters started arriving, I felt like I might float right up to the ceiling with pride. Duke offered partial scholarship. Emory came through with grants that covered half the tuition. But it was the University of Georgia that sealed the deal, a full academic scholarship that would cover tuition, books, and even a meal plan. Jessica danced around our tiny living room, holding that letter like it was made of gold, and I cried tears of joy that I'd been holding back for 20 years. But even with the scholarship, there were expenses. Dorm room setup, computer, clothes appropriate for college life, spending money for the 1,000 little things that come up when you're living away from home for the first time. I liquidated the entire college fund. 24 years of $25 deposits plus interest came to just over $15,000. It seemed like a fortune and barely enough all at the same time. The shopping trips that summer were bittersweet. Walking through Target and Bed Bath & Beyond, watching Jessica pick out bedding and desk lamps and miniature appliances for her dorm room, I felt like I was watching her slip away from me one purchase at a time. She was so excited, so focused on her future, that she barely seemed to notice how carefully I counted every dollar, how I steered her toward the sale racks and generic brands when she wasn't looking. Move-in day arrived like a thunderstorm, sudden, intense, and leaving everything changed in its wake. I helped her carry boxes up 3 flights of stairs to her dorm room, met her roommate's parents, who drove up from Savannah in a BMW, and spoke in the kind of casual, confident tones that come from never having to count pennies. They were kind enough, but I felt the gap between us like a physical thing, wide and unbridgeable. That night, driving home alone on Highway 78, I cried for 50 miles straight. Not from sadness, exactly, but from something deeper. Relief, maybe? Pride, certainly. The bone-deep satisfaction of a job well done, a promise kept, a daughter launched into the world with every advantage I could possibly give her. The first year went smoothly. Jessica called every Sunday, her voice bubbling with stories about professors and study groups and campus traditions I'd never experienced myself. Her grades were stellar, Dean's List both semesters. She joined the Pre-Law Society and volunteered at a legal aid clinic in Athens. Everything was unfolding exactly as we dreamed. But somewhere during sophomore year, something shifted. The Sunday calls became shorter, less frequent. When I asked about her classes, she'd give brief, distracted answers before changing the subject. When I asked about her friends, she'd mention names I'd never heard before. Kids with parents who owned horse farms and lake houses, kids who spent spring break skiing in Colorado or lounging on beaches in Mexico. I told myself it was natural. She was growing up, finding her own way, discovering who she was outside of our little bubble on Maple Street. But a mother knows when something is wrong, the same way she knows when a fever is breaking, or when a scraped knee needs more than a kiss to heal. The first hint of real trouble came during parents' weekend in the fall of her sophomore year. I'd saved for months to afford the hotel room, had taken vacation days I couldn't really spare from the factory. But when I arrived on campus, Jessica seemed almost embarrassed to introduce me to her friends. She hurried me through the activities, kept checking her phone during dinner, and when I suggested we attend the parent-student reception together, she claimed she had too much studying to do. I spent that weekend walking around Athens by myself, eating alone at the hotel restaurant, wondering when I'd become someone my daughter wanted to hide from. The drive home felt longer than usual, and I found myself questioning everything. Had I done something wrong? Said something embarrassing? Was my pride in her accomplishments somehow suffocating her? Junior year brought new concerns and new expenses. Jessica joined a sorority. Not one of the most expensive ones, she assured me, but still requiring dues and formal dresses and participation in events that seemed to cost money at every turn. She needed a car, she said. Everyone had cars. She couldn't keep depending on friends for rides. The used Honda Civic cost $8,000 that I didn't have, so I took out a loan against my house. The changes were subtle at first. Jessica's accent softened around the edges, losing the thick Georgia drawl she'd grown up with. Her vocabulary peppered with words like summer instead of visit. When talking about staying at friends, houses, networking, instead of just meeting people. Her clothes gradually upgrading from Target basics to brands I'd never heard of, but that seemed to cost 3 times as much. When I mentioned these changes during one of our increasingly rare phone calls, Jessica got defensive. "I'm just trying to fit in, Mom. This is how everyone talks here. This is what professional people wear." The way she said professional people, with just a hint of condescension, made something cold settle in my stomach. The spring of junior year brought an internship opportunity in Atlanta. Unpaid, of course, but with a prestigious law firm that could lead to job opportunities after graduation. The internship required business attire, transportation, and housing in the city for 12 weeks. Jessica had it all figured out. She'd found a sublet in Buckhead, just a few miles from the law firm, only $1,200 a month. The clothes she needed would cost at least $2,000. Gas and food and incidentals would be another $1,000. I looked at the numbers she'd written out on a piece of notebook paper, her handwriting neat and confident, and felt like I was reading a foreign language. $5,000 might as well have been $50,000. I'd already borrowed against the house for her car. I was working overtime every week just to keep up with the payments. There was no more money to find. "Honey," I said carefully, sitting at our kitchen table with that piece of paper between us, "this sounds like an amazing opportunity, but I just don't see how we can make it work financially." Jessica's face changed then, hardening in a way I'd never seen before. "Mom, this is my future we're talking about. This internship could change everything for me. I understand that, baby, but no, you don't understand." Her voice was sharp now, impatient. "You." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Don't understand what it's like to be surrounded by people whose parents can just write a check for anything they need. Do you know what it's like to constantly have to explain why I can't do things, why I can't afford things? The accusation hit me like a physical blow. Here was my daughter, the girl I'd sacrificed everything for, making me feel guilty for not having money I'd never had. "Jessica, I've given you everything I possibly could. I've never said no to anything important." "Important to who?" she shot back. "Important by your standards?" "Mom, I need to be able to compete with these people. I need to look the part, act the part. This isn't about want, it's about need." I stared at her across our little table, this young woman I'd raised but barely recognized, and felt something fracture inside me. When had my love become inadequate? When had my sacrifices become insufficient? When had I become the obstacle standing between Jessica and the life she deserved? In the end, I took out a personal loan at 18% interest to pay for the internship. The monthly payments would stretch me to the breaking point, but I told myself it was an investment in Jessica's future. Our future. That this internship would lead to a good job, which would lead to financial stability, which would somehow make all the struggle worthwhile. The summer passed quietly. Jessica called occasionally from Atlanta, always rushed, always busy. She was learning so much, she said, making connections, building her resume. I worked double shifts when I could get them, trying to stay ahead of the bills, telling myself that this was temporary, that once she graduated and got a good job, things would be easier. Senior year arrived with a new set of expectations and expenses. Jessica had been accepted to several law schools, but the one she really wanted to attend was Emory. Prestigious, expensive, and requiring test prep for the LSAT that cost another $1,000. The law school application process itself was even more costly than undergraduate applications had been. Each school required fees, transcripts, letters of recommendation that needed to be professionally formatted and submitted. I found myself borrowing money I couldn't afford to pay back, working jobs that left me exhausted and aching, all while Jessica talked about her post-graduation plans with an entitlement that took my breath away. She'd grown accustomed to having what she needed when she needed it. The struggle, the sacrifice, the sleepless nights I spent figuring out how to pay for it all. None of that touched her world anymore. The final straw came in April of her senior year. Jessica called to tell me about graduation week activities, a senior cruise that cost $1,500, a formal dinner that required a designer dress, a weekend in Savannah with her sorority sisters to celebrate their impending graduation. The total came to over $3,000. "Mom, this is it," she said, her voice bright with excitement. "This is my last chance to do these things with my college friends. After this, we'll all be scattered across the country. You understand, right?" I understood, all right. I understood that my daughter had lost sight of where she came from. I understood that all my sacrifices had created a young woman who took abundance for granted and saw my financial limitations as a personal failing rather than a mathematical reality. But I also understood something else. I understood that saying no would mean watching Jessica graduate feeling like she'd missed out on experiences her friends took for granted. It would mean her final memories of college being tinged with resentment toward me, toward our circumstances, toward the life I'd tried so hard to build for her. So I said yes. I took out another loan, this one secured against my car, and sent her the money. When the paperwork arrived from the bank, I sat at my kitchen table and cried for the first time in years. Not from sadness exactly, but from a bone-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with physical work and everything to do with the weight of loving someone who no longer seemed to see you clearly. May rolled around with all the frantic preparations that come with graduation. Jessica would be graduating summa cum laude, a distinction that filled me with fierce pride even as it highlighted the growing distance between us. The graduation ceremony was scheduled for a Saturday morning in Athens, followed by a reception and various parties throughout the weekend. I bought a new dress for the occasion, navy blue with a modest neckline and sleeves that covered the scars on my arms from years of factory work. I had my hair done at the salon in town, something I hadn't done in over 2 years. I polished my one pair of good shoes and practiced what I would say when people asked me about Jessica's accomplishments. I was ready to beam with pride, to stand in that crowd of parents and claim my place as the woman who had raised such a remarkable daughter. The morning of graduation dawned clear and warm, with the kind of bright Georgia sunshine that makes everything look possible. I drove to Athens with my windows down, singing along to the radio, feeling lighter than I had in months. This was it. The culmination of everything I'd worked for, everything I'd sacrificed for, everything I'd dreamed of during those long nights when Jessica was little, and the future felt like a distant country I might never visit. The campus was buzzing with activity when I arrived. Families dressed in their finest clothes wandered between buildings, taking photos and hugging graduates in their caps and gowns. I found parking in a distant lot and walked toward the ceremony site, my heart hammering with anticipation. The graduation was being held in Sanford Stadium, the massive football arena transformed for the occasion with a stage at one end and thousands of chairs arranged in precise rows. I found my seat in the section designated for families, surrounded by parents who looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine. Perfectly pressed clothes, expensive cameras, confident smiles that spoke of lives lived without the constant worry about money. Jessica looked beautiful in her cap and gown, her dark hair curled and pinned in an elegant style I'd never seen before. She walked with her classmates into the stadium, her posture straight and confident, and I felt tears spring to my eyes. This was my daughter. This brilliant, poised young woman was the baby I'd rocked to sleep in that tiny house on Maple Street, the toddler who'd followed me around the kitchen while I cooked dinner after long days at the factory, the teenager who'd stayed up all night writing essays about justice and equality and changing the world. The ceremony proceeded with all the traditional pomp and circumstance. Faculty members in elaborate robes processed across the stage. The university president delivered a speech about the future leaders sitting in those folding chairs. The dean of each college was introduced and recognized for their contributions to education and scholarship. When Jessica's name was called, I jumped to my feet and cheered louder than anyone else in that stadium. She walked across the stage with grace and confidence, shook hands with the dean, received her diploma, and paused for the traditional photograph. In that moment, all the struggle felt worth it. All the sacrifice felt justified. All the sleepless nights and double shifts and borrowed money crystallized into this single, perfect moment of accomplishment. But then something happened that I never could have anticipated. Something that would change everything between us in the span of 30 seconds. As Jessica returned to her seat, diploma in hand, the microphone crackled to life again. The dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, a distinguished woman with silver hair and a warm smile, stepped forward to make what she called a special recognition. "Before we conclude today's ceremony," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the stadium, "I want to take a moment to recognize the extraordinary sacrifices made by the families of our graduates. Behind every successful student is a support system that has invested not just in their education, but in their dreams." I smiled and settled back in my chair, expecting some generic acknowledgement of parental sacrifice. But what came next left me frozen in my seat. I want to particularly recognize Ms. Margaret Chen, whose daughter Jessica is graduating summa cum laude today. What many of you don't know is the remarkable story of sacrifice and determination that made Jessica's education possible. My stomach dropped. Why was she talking about me? How did she know my name? Margaret worked double and triple shifts at a textile factory to pay for Jessica's education. She sold her mother's wedding ring to pay for SAT prep courses. She took out loans against her home and her car to fund internships and graduation activities. She has given everything, and I mean everything, to ensure that her daughter could pursue her dreams without the burden of student debt. The applause that followed felt like mockery. I could feel hundreds of eyes turning toward me, searching for the woman the dean was describing. My face burned with embarrassment and confusion. How did she know these details? Why was she sharing them? But the dean wasn't finished. What makes Margaret's sacrifice even more remarkable is that she did all of this while Jessica was apparently telling her friends and sorority sisters that she was, basically paying her own way through college, and that her mother wasn't really involved in her education. The silence that fell over the stadium was deafening. I felt like I might be sick. Jessica's head turned sharply toward the stage, her face pale with shock. "Jessica," the dean continued, her voice taking on a sterner tone, "approached our office last month, requesting that her mother not be listed in the graduation program as contributing to her education because, and I quote, 'it might be embarrassing to have people know I come from that kind of background.'" The words hit me like physical blows. Jessica had asked to have me erased from her graduation. She was embarrassed by me, by where she came from, by the woman who had given everything to make this day possible. "I want everyone in this stadium to understand something," the dean said, her voice rising with conviction. "Education is not just about individual achievement. It's about community, sacrifice, and the recognition that success is never accomplished alone." Margaret Chen embodies everything we hope to see in a parent: selflessness, determination, and unconditional love. She paused, searching the crowd until her eyes found me. "Margaret, would you please stand so we can properly acknowledge your incredible contribution to your daughter's success?" I wanted to disappear. I wanted to sink through the floor of that stadium and never resurface. But something in the dean's voice, some note of genuine respect and admiration, made me slowly rise to my feet. The applause that followed was thunderous, sustained, and came from every corner of that massive stadium. "And, Jessica," the dean said, her voice now carrying an unmistakable note of disappointment, "I hope you'll take a moment to reflect on the woman who made this day possible. True success isn't measured just by grades or honors. It's measured by how we treat the people who love us most." The ceremony concluded in a blur. I found myself surrounded by strangers offering congratulations and asking questions about my story. Parents I'd never met shook my hand and told me I should be proud. Faculty members made their way over to introduce themselves and express their admiration. Through it all, I kept looking for Jessica, but she seemed to have vanished into the crowd of graduates. When I finally spotted her near the edge of the stadium, she was surrounded by her friends, her face red, with what I could only assume was mortification. The ride home was the longest 2 hours of my life. Jessica sat in the passenger seat of my old Honda, still wearing her graduation gown, staring out the window in complete silence. The diploma lay between us on the console, a piece of paper that now felt less like an achievement and more like evidence of how far apart we'd grown. "Jessica," I finally said as we pulled into our driveway, "we need to talk about what happened today." She turned to look at me then, and the anger in her eyes was like nothing I'd ever seen before. "How could you do that to me, Mom? How could you humiliate me in front of everyone I know?" The accusation was so backward, so completely opposite of what had actually happened, that I couldn't speak for several seconds. "I didn't do anything," I said quietly. "The dean did that on her own." "But you told her those things about me. You made me look ungrateful in front of the entire university." I stared at my daughter, this young woman I'd raised but no longer recognized, and felt something break inside me that I knew would never heal. "Jessica," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "the only thing that made you look ungrateful today was your own actions. I never spoke to the dean. But apparently, you did. Apparently, you asked to have me removed from your graduation program because you were embarrassed by me." The silence that followed stretched between us like a chasm. In it, I heard the echo of 24 years of sacrifice, love, hope, and dreams. I heard the sound of a relationship fracturing along lines I'd never even known existed. And in that silence, I finally understood that sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes all the sacrifice in the world can't bridge the gap between who you raised someone to be and who they choose to become. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the very thing they least want to acknowledge. And the hardest lesson you can learn is when to stop giving it. That night, Jessica stormed into the house and went straight to her old bedroom without saying another word. I sat alone in the kitchen, still wearing my navy dress, staring at the graduation program that someone had handed me as we left the stadium. There, in black and white, under Jessica's name, was a line I'd never seen before. "Special recognition for academic excellence achieved through independent financial management and personal determination." Independent financial management. The phrase tasted bitter in my mouth. Every loan payment, every double shift, every sacrifice I'd made had been erased with those clinical words. 24 years of love and devotion reduced to Jessica's, quote, personal determination. The house felt different that night, charged with an energy I couldn't name. I walked through the rooms touching familiar objects, the ceramic owl Jessica had made in third-grade pottery class, the academic achievement certificates I'd framed and hung in the hallway, the photo albums filled with images of science fairs and honor roll ceremonies. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. Around midnight, I heard Jessica's bedroom door creak open. Her footsteps were hesitant on the hardwood floor, and when she appeared in the kitchen doorway, her face was blotchy from crying. For a moment, she looked like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, seeking comfort and protection from a world that felt too big and scary. "Mom," she said softly, her voice hoarse, "I need to explain." I gestured to the chair across from me, the same chair where we'd shared countless conversations over the years. She sat down heavily, her graduation gown replaced by an old t-shirt and pajama pants that made her look young and vulnerable. "I never meant for any of this to happen," she began, her hands twisting in her lap. "The thing with the graduation program, it wasn't about being embarrassed by you. It was about fitting in." "Fitting in?" I repeated, keeping my voice neutral. "You don't understand what it's like there, Mom. These people, my friends, they come from a completely different world. Their parents are doctors and lawyers and business owners. They vacation in Europe and drive cars that cost more than our house. When they talk about their families, it's always about what amazing opportunities their parents provided, what connections they made, what doors were opened for them." She paused, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "I just wanted to belong somewhere. I wanted to be seen as someone who earned everything myself, not someone whose mother had to sacrifice and struggle and borrow money just to keep up." The words hung between us like smoke from a fire neither of us had meant to start. I could see the pain in Jessica's eyes, the genuine confusion of a young woman who'd somehow lost sight of where she came from while trying to figure out where she was going. "Jessica," I said carefully, "there's no shame in coming from struggle. There's no shame in having a mother who worked hard to give you opportunities. But there is, Mom. The words burst out of her with surprising force. There is shame when everyone around you takes wealth for granted, and you're the one person who has to explain why you can't just ask your parents for money whenever you need it. There is shame when your sorority sisters plan trips to their families, vacation homes, and you have to make excuses about why you can't join them. There is shame when people assume your success came easily, and you know the truth about what it cost. I stared at my daughter across our small kitchen table, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time in years. This wasn't just about embarrassment or entitlement. This was about survival in a world I'd never inhabited. A world where she'd learned that her background was something to overcome rather than something to honor. "So you decided to pretend I didn't exist," I said quietly. "No," her voice cracked. "I never wanted to pretend you didn't exist. I just wanted to pretend that our circumstances were different. I wanted to pretend that your sacrifices were choices, not necessities. I wanted to pretend that you supported my education because you could afford to, not because you were willing to go without everything else to make it happen." The kitchen clock ticked steadily in the silence that followed. Outside, a dog barked in the distance, and somewhere down the street, a car door slammed. Normal sounds of a normal night in a neighborhood where nothing extraordinary ever happened, except that everything had changed, and nothing would ever be normal again. "The dean," I said finally. "How did she know?" Jessica's face crumpled. "Mrs. Rodriguez, my old guidance counselor from high school. She volunteers with the Alumni Association now, helps them identify students who've overcome significant obstacles. She submitted a nomination for me to receive some kind of special recognition, and she included all those details about what you did to make my education possible. And you asked them to remove it." "I panicked," Jessica whispered. "When they told me about the nomination, all I could think about was my friends hearing those details. I imagined them looking at me with pity, or worse, looking at me differently. I imagined them realizing that I wasn't really one of them, that I didn't belong in their world. So you told them your mother wasn't really involved in your education." The tears came then, silent and steady. "I told them you'd helped with some expenses, but that I'd mostly managed on my own through scholarships and work-study programs. I told them the nomination was based on outdated information and that it would be more accurate to focus on my academic achievements rather than my family background." Each word was like a small knife, cutting away at something I hadn't even known was holding me together. My daughter, the girl I'd raised to value honesty and integrity above all else, had systematically erased me from her story in order to fit into a world that would never accept where she came from. "What I don't understand," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded, "is how you could live with that. How you could let me take out loans and work those extra shifts and sacrifice my health and my retirement, all while telling people that you were doing it on your own." Jessica's shoulders shook with sobs she'd been holding back for hours. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself that once I graduated and got a good job, I'd pay you back for everything, and then I could be honest about what you'd done for me. I thought I could have both, the acceptance I needed in college and the relationship I wanted with you afterward. But that's not how truth works, baby girl. The old endearment slipped out before I could stop it, and Jessica flinched like I'd struck her. Truth isn't something you can postpone or edit or manage. Truth is what it is, and when you try to reshape it, you reshape yourself in the process. We sat in silence for a long time after that. Jessica cried quietly, and I stared at the graduation program, trying to make sense of how we'd arrived at this moment. Somewhere in my chest, I felt something shifting, settling into a new configuration that I didn't recognize but couldn't deny. The next few days passed in a strange, suspended animation. Jessica stayed in her old room, emerging only for meals that we ate in relative silence. She'd received job offers from 2 law firms in Atlanta and 1 in Charlotte, all of them excellent opportunities that would allow her to begin building the career we'd both dreamed of for so long. But the triumph felt hollow now, tainted by everything that had been revealed at graduation. On Wednesday, 3 days after the ceremony, Jessica found me in the living room folding laundry. She'd clearly been working up the courage to say something, because she stood in the doorway for several minutes before speaking. "Mom, I've been thinking about what you said about truth," she began, her voice tentative. "And I've decided to write letters to my friends, to my sorority sisters, to anyone who heard what the dean said." I want to set the record straight about everything you've done for me." I continued folding towels, keeping my hands busy while my mind processed her words. And what would those letters say? They'd tell the truth. About your sacrifices, about the loans, about how hard you worked to make my education possible. They'd explain that I was wrong to try to minimize your role in my success, and that I'm grateful for everything you've given me. It was a generous offer, and I could see that Jessica meant it sincerely. But something about it felt wrong, performative in a way that missed the point entirely. "Jessica," I said gently, setting down the towel I'd been folding, "who are those letters really for?" She looked confused. "What do you mean? I mean, are you writing them because you want people to know the truth about me? Or because you want to repair your reputation after what happened at graduation?" The question hung in the air between us, and I watched Jessica's face as she worked through the implications. Her mouth opened as if to protest, then closed again as understanding dawned. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "Maybe both? The thing is, honey, I don't need your friends to know about my sacrifices. I don't need recognition or acknowledgement from people I've never met. What I need is for you to understand that what you did wasn't just about managing your image. It was about denying the fundamental truth of who we are and where you came from." Jessica sat down heavily on the couch beside me. "I do understand that, now, but how do I fix it?" "I'm not sure you can fix it," I said, and the words surprised me as much as they seemed to surprise her. "Some things, once they're broken, don't go back to the way they were before. Sometimes the best you can do is acknowledge what happened and try to do better going forward." That evening, Jessica accepted the job offer from the law firm in Atlanta. It was a prestigious position with a starting salary that made my head spin, more money than I'd ever made in a year, enough to pay off all the loans I'd taken out for her education, and still have plenty left over for a comfortable life. "I want to pay you back," she said when she told me about the job. "For everything. The college fund, the loans, all of it. It might take a few years, but I want to make this right." I appreciated the sentiment, I truly did. But as I looked at my daughter, this accomplished young woman on the verge of beginning her professional life, I realized that money had never really been the issue. The money was just the surface, the visible manifestation of something much deeper that had been damaged between us. "Keep your money, Jessica," I said. "Pay off your own expenses, build your own life, save for your own future. That's what the money was always for, to give you the freedom to succeed without being burdened by debt." "But I want to help you," she insisted. "I want to make sure you're taken care of." "I've been taking care of myself for 52 years, I replied. "I'll figure out how to manage for whatever years I have left." The week before Jessica was scheduled to move to Atlanta for her new job, she made an announcement that caught me completely off guard. She'd broken up with her boyfriend of 2 years, a law student from a wealthy family in Savannah who'd never shown much interest in meeting me. "Why?" I asked, genuinely curious. Jessica was packing boxes in her room, sorting through years of accumulated possessions, and deciding what to keep and what to leave behind. She paused with a framed photo in her hands, a picture of her and her boyfriend at some formal event, both of them dressed in clothes that probably cost more than I made in a month. "Because I realized that I was attracted to him for all the wrong reasons," she said, placing the photo face down in a box marked "Donate." "I liked the way he made me feel sophisticated and worldly. I liked being invited to his family's events and meeting their influential friends. I liked the way people looked at us together, like we were the perfect successful couple. And now I realize that I was doing the same thing with him that I did with you, using relationships to create an image of myself that wasn't entirely true. I was using him to feel like I belonged in a world that I'm not sure I actually want to belong in." It was the first genuinely reflective thing Jessica had said since graduation, and I felt a small flutter of hope in my chest. Maybe this experience, painful as it had been, could still teach her something valuable about authenticity and self-respect. The night before Jessica left for Atlanta, we sat together on the front porch in the same rocking chairs, where I'd spent countless evenings during her childhood, helping with homework or just talking about her day. The air was warm and humid, filled with the sound of cicadas and the distant hum of traffic on the main road. "Mom," Jessica said suddenly, her voice small in the darkness, Do you forgive me? The question I'd been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. I rocked slowly in my chair, listening to the familiar creak of wood against wood, thinking about forgiveness and what it means, and whether it's something you can choose to feel or something that just happens to you over time. I forgive you for being young and confused and making mistakes, I said finally. I forgive you for wanting to fit in and for being embarrassed by circumstances you didn't choose. I even forgive you for trying to protect your image at my expense, because I understand that you were scared and overwhelmed. But, Jessica prompted, sensing there was more. But I can't forgive you for lying to yourself about what those choices cost, both for me and for you. And I can't forgive you for the years we lost while you were becoming someone I didn't recognize. Jessica was quiet for a long time after that. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with tears. I don't know how to be the person you raised me to be, while also being successful in the world I want to succeed in. Maybe that's the wrong question, I suggested. Maybe the question isn't how to be the person I raised you to be, but how to be the person you actually are, regardless of what world you're trying to succeed in. What if I don't know who that person is anymore? Then you figure it out. You make mistakes and you learn from them, and you keep trying until you find your way back to yourself. But you do it honestly, without pretending to be someone you're not, or denying where you came from. The next morning, Jessica loaded her Honda Civic with boxes and suitcases and the accumulated possessions of 22 years of life. I stood in the driveway, watching her arrange everything with the same methodical precision she'd applied to her studies, and I felt the familiar ache of letting go that comes with every major transition in a child's life. "I'll call you," she said, hugging me goodbye. "Every week, I promise." "Call me when you have something real to say," I replied. "Not because you think you should, but because you actually want to share your life with me." She pulled back to look at me, confusion written across her face. "What does that mean?" "It means I'd rather hear from you once a month with honesty than every week with politeness. It means I want to know who you're becoming, not just what you're achieving. It means I want a relationship with the real Jessica, whoever she turns out to be." As I watched her drive away, her car disappearing around the corner onto the main road, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. Not relief that she was gone, but relief that we had finally told each other the truth about where we stood. For the first time in years, I knew exactly what was real between us and what wasn't. The house felt different without Jessica in it, but not in the way I'd anticipated. It didn't feel empty exactly, more like it had been cleared of something heavy that I hadn't realized was weighing it down. I moved through the rooms touching familiar objects, but now they felt like mine again, rather than like museum pieces preserved for someone who might or might not visit. 2 weeks after Jessica left for Atlanta, I received a phone call that would change everything once again. It was from Dean Patricia Williams, the woman who had spoken at Jessica's graduation ceremony. Her voice was warm and professional, and she began by apologizing for any distress the graduation incident might have caused. "Mrs. Chen," she said, "I wanted you to know that I don't make a habit of embarrassing students or their families during public ceremonies. But what Jessica requested was so troubling to me that I felt compelled to address it directly." "I appreciate that," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure I did. "The reason I'm calling is that your story has resonated with many people on our campus. We've received dozens of calls and emails from faculty, staff, and other parents who were moved by what they heard about your sacrifices for Jessica's education." I wasn't sure where this conversation was heading, but something in Dean Williams' tone made me pay attention. "We'd like to invite you to speak at next year's graduation ceremony," she continued. "Not about Jessica specifically, but about the broader experience of parents who make extraordinary sacrifices to support their children's education. We think your perspective could be valuable to our graduating students and their families." The invitation caught me completely off guard. "I'm not a public speaker," I said. "I'm just a factory worker who wanted to give her daughter opportunities I never had." "That's exactly why we want you to speak," Dean Williams replied. "Your story represents something that often gets overlooked in our celebration of academic achievement: the hidden costs and sacrifices that make education possible for first-generation college students." I spent the next several days thinking about the invitation. The idea of standing in front of thousands of people and talking about my life felt terrifying and impossible. But there was something appealing about the thought of telling Jessica's story, our story, in a way that honored both the sacrifices and the complexity of what had happened between us. 3 weeks after Jessica moved to Atlanta, she called me on a Tuesday evening. Not because it was a scheduled weekly call, but because something had happened at work that reminded her of a conversation we'd had years earlier about standing up for people who couldn't advocate for themselves. I was assigned to a case involving a family being evicted from their apartment, she told me. The landlord was claiming they owed back rent, but when I looked at the paperwork, I realized they'd been making payments that weren't being properly credited to their account. She went on to describe how she'd spent hours tracking down payment records and organizing documentation to prove that the family had been current on their rent all along. It was exactly the kind of work she'd dreamed of doing when she first decided to become a lawyer, using her skills to help people who needed someone to fight for them. "It felt good, Mom," she said, and for the first time since graduation, her voice sounded like the Jessica I remembered from childhood. It felt like I was doing something that mattered, not just something that would look good on my resume. "I'm proud of you," I said, and I meant it. "There's something else," Jessica continued. "I've been thinking about what you said about being honest about who I am. I realized that I've been so focused on trying to fit into this professional world that I forgot why I wanted to be part of it in the first place. And why was that? Because I wanted to help people like us. People who work hard and follow the rules but still get pushed around by systems they don't understand. People who need someone with education and resources to level the playing field for them." It was a small moment, that phone call, but it felt like the beginning of something important. Not a return to the relationship we'd had before, but the start of a new relationship, built on truth rather than expectation, on acceptance rather than denial. Over the next few months, Jessica and I began to rebuild our connection, one honest conversation at a time. She told me about the challenges of her new job, about learning to navigate office politics and professional relationships. I told her about my own struggles with the loan payments and the reality of planning for retirement with depleted savings. Neither of us pretended that everything was fine, but we also didn't dwell on what had been broken between us. Instead, we focused on what was possible going forward, on who we were becoming rather than who we had been. In November, Jessica came home for Thanksgiving. It was her first visit since graduation, and I wasn't sure what to expect. Would she bring expensive wine and stories about her sophisticated Atlanta life? Would she critique my cooking or suggest improvements to the house? Instead, she arrived with a small suitcase and an offer to cook dinner herself. She'd learned to make a few dishes from a colleague whose grandmother had immigrated from Italy, and she wanted to try combining some of those techniques with the traditional Southern recipes she'd grown up with. We spent the afternoon in the kitchen together, chopping vegetables and sharing stories about work and life in a way that felt natural and unforced. Jessica asked about my job at the factory, about the other women I worked with, about plans I was making for the future. She listened to my answers with genuine interest, without trying to solve my problems or offer advice I hadn't requested. That evening, as we sat at the same kitchen table where we'd shared thousands of meals over the years, Jessica brought up the subject I'd been wondering if she would address. "I heard about the speaking invitation," she said carefully, "from Dean Williams." I paused with my fork halfway to my mouth. "How did you hear about that?" "She called me to make sure I was comfortable with the idea of you speaking at graduation. She wanted me to know that she wasn't trying to embarrass me or cause problems between us." "And what did you tell her?" Jessica looked down at her plate, then back up at me. "I told her that what you choose to do with your own story is entirely up to you. I told her that I have no right to ask you to keep quiet about your experiences just to protect my comfort or my image." It was a small statement, but it represented a huge shift in how Jessica understood our relationship and her role in it. For months, she had been operating from the assumption that my choices should be filtered through their impact on her life and reputation. Now she was acknowledging that I had my own story to tell, independent of her approval or comfort. "I also told her," Jessica continued, "that I think people should hear what you have to say. I think other parents in similar situations could benefit from your perspective, and I think students like me need to understand the real cost of the opportunities we've been given." After Thanksgiving, I began working on the speech I would give at the following spring's graduation ceremony. It was difficult to find the right tone, to balance honesty about the challenges with appreciation for the opportunities Jessica's education had provided. I wanted to honor the sacrifices I'd made without making them sound noble or heroic. I wanted to acknowledge the pain of what had happened between Jessica and me without making it the central focus of the story. Most importantly, I wanted to speak to the parents in the audience who might be struggling with their own complicated relationships with children they'd sacrificed everything to support. I wanted them to know that love doesn't always look the way we expect it to, and that sometimes the greatest gift we can give our children is the space to make their own mistakes and learn from them. As winter turned to spring, Jessica and I settled into a new rhythm of communication. We talked every couple of weeks, sometimes about important things, and sometimes about nothing much at all. She told me about cases she was working on and colleagues she was getting to know. I told her about changes at the factory and neighbors who asked about her. The conversations felt different from the ones we'd had during her college years, less performative, more genuine. Jessica no longer felt the need to impress me with her accomplishments or shield me from her struggles. I no longer felt the need to be endlessly supportive and understanding about choices that confused or hurt me. In April, a month before the graduation where I would be speaking, Jessica called with news that surprised me. "I've been accepted to a fellowship program," she said, her voice bubbling with excitement. "It's with a legal aid organization that provides services to low-income families. The pay is terrible compared to what I'm making now, but the work is exactly what I've always wanted to do." "Congratulations," I said and meant it. "When would it start?" "That's the thing. It would mean leaving my current job and moving back to Georgia. The fellowship is based in Macon, about 2 hours from you. It's not close enough for regular visits, but it's closer than Atlanta." I could hear the question in her voice, the uncertainty about whether this move would be welcome or complicated given everything that had happened between us. "Jessica," I said carefully, "you need to make this decision based on what's right for your life and your career, not on what might be comfortable for our relationship." "But our relationship matters to me," she said. "It matters more than I realized before." "I know it does, honey. But the relationship we have now, the honest one we've been building over the past few months, that can't exist whether you're in Atlanta or Macon or anywhere else. Geography isn't what was broken between us, and geography isn't what's healing it either." 2 weeks later, Jessica accepted the fellowship and gave notice at her law firm. She would be moving to Macon in June, just after I gave my speech at the University of Georgia graduation ceremony. The morning of graduation dawned clear and bright, much like the morning exactly 1 year earlier, when everything between Jessica and me had changed so dramatically. I dressed carefully in a new outfit, not expensive, but appropriate for the occasion, and drove to Athens with my speech notes on the passenger seat beside me. This time, I wasn't sitting in the audience watching someone else's story unfold. This time, I was part of the program, scheduled to speak just before the conferring of degrees. As I sat on the stage looking out at the sea of graduates and families, I thought about all the stories represented in that stadium. How many other parents had made sacrifices they'd never talk about? How many other students were struggling to reconcile where they came from with where they were going? When Dean Williams introduced me, her words were generous but simple. She described me as a parent who had something important to say about the hidden costs of education and the complicated dynamics of love and sacrifice in families. I walked to the podium on unsteady legs, looking out at thousands of faces I didn't know, searching for the words I'd practiced dozens of times, but that felt entirely new in this moment. "My name is Margaret Chen," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the stadium's sound system. "A year ago, I sat in those seats where your families are sitting now, watching my daughter graduate with honors from this university. I thought it would be one of the proudest moments of my life. Instead, it became one of the most painful." I went on to tell the story, not the entire story, but the important parts. The years of sacrifice and struggle, the growing distance between Jessica and me, the moment when I realized that all my love and support had somehow created a young woman who was ashamed of where she came from. "I'm not telling you this story to embarrass my daughter or to seek sympathy for myself," I said, looking directly at the graduating students. "I'm telling you this story because I think it illustrates something important about success and gratitude, and the responsibility we have to acknowledge the people who help make our achievements possible. I talked about the difference between independence and denial, between self-reliance and ingratitude. I talked about the importance of honesty in relationships, even when that honesty is uncomfortable or inconvenient. To the parents in the audience, I said, I want you to know that sacrifice without recognition is still sacrifice. Love without acknowledgement is still love. Your contributions to your children's success don't become less valuable if they go unnoticed or unappreciated. And to the graduates, I continued, I want you to understand that accepting help doesn't diminish your achievements. Acknowledging the people who supported you doesn't make you less capable or deserving. True strength comes not from pretending you did everything alone, but from recognizing the community of people who believed in you and invested in your future. The speech lasted only 10 minutes, but it felt like I'd been talking for hours. When I finished, the applause was warm and sustained, and I could see people wiping their eyes throughout the audience. As I returned to my seat on the stage, I caught sight of Jessica in the audience. She wasn't graduating. She'd driven down from Atlanta just to hear my speech, and she was crying openly, applauding with an enthusiasm that made my heart race. After the ceremony, I was surrounded by people wanting to talk about what I'd said. Parents thanked me for putting words to experiences they'd never been able to articulate. Students apologized for things they'd never acknowledged. Faculty members told me about their own family stories and the complicated dynamics of love and expectations. Through it all, I kept looking for Jessica, but she seemed to have disappeared into the crowd. It wasn't until I was walking back to my car an hour later that I found her leaning against my Honda, still in the dress she'd worn to hear my speech. Mom, she said when she saw me approaching, I am so sorry. For everything. For the person I became, for the way I treated you, for the years I wasted trying to be someone I'm not. I stopped a few feet away from her, taking in her tear-streaked face and the genuine remorse in her voice. Jessica, we've been through this. You don't need to keep apologizing. Yes, I do, she said firmly. Because what you did up there, what you shared with all those people, that took courage I didn't know you had. And it made me realize that I've been so focused on trying to earn forgiveness that I never stopped to really understand what I did wrong. She took a shaky breath and continued. I didn't just deny your sacrifices, Mom. I denied you. I denied the woman who raised me and loved me and believed in me when no one else did. I denied the values you taught me and the strength you showed me and the example you set for me every single day. The parking lot was emptying around us as families loaded into cars and drove away, but neither of us seemed in a hurry to leave. This felt like a conversation that had been years in the making, and I wanted to let it unfold naturally. I spent so much time trying to fit into a world that I thought was better than where I came from, Jessica continued. But listening to you speak today, I realized that there's nothing better than being raised by someone who works hard and tells the truth and puts family above everything else. There's nothing better than coming from love, even when that love comes with struggle. We stood there in the afternoon sun, mother and daughter, looking at each other across a year of hurt and healing. I could see in Jessica's face the little girl who used to help me fold laundry, the teenager who stayed up all night writing essays about justice, the young woman who still called me when she needed comfort or advice. So what happens now? I asked. Now I figure out how to be the person you raised me to be while also being successful in whatever world I choose to be part of, she said. And I do it honestly, without pretending to be someone I'm not, or denying where I came from. It was exactly what I'd hoped to hear, delivered in words that sounded like they came from her heart, rather than from guilt or obligation. As we drove our separate cars out of the parking lot, Jessica heading back to Atlanta, me heading home to Millbrook, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over a year, hope for the future of our relationship. Not hope that we could go back to the way things were before, because that was neither possible nor desirable, but hope that we could continue moving forward together, building something new on the foundation of truth we'd finally managed to establish between us. 3 months after my speech at graduation, I received an unexpected visitor at my front door. It was a young woman named Sarah, probably in her early 20s, holding a worn copy of a newspaper article about my talk. Her hands trembled slightly as she introduced herself, and her eyes held the same desperate hope I'd seen in my own mirror during Jessica's college years. "Mrs. Chen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I read about what you said at graduation, and I was wondering if I could ask you something." I invited her in and made tea while she told me her story. Sarah was a sophomore at the community college in town, working 2 jobs while trying to pay for classes her single mother couldn't afford. Her mother cleaned office buildings at night and took care of elderly neighbors during the day, bringing in just enough money to keep their small apartment and put food on the table. "The thing is," Sarah continued, wrapping her hands around the warm mug, "I got accepted to transfer to the state university next fall, but the financial aid won't cover everything. My mom keeps saying she'll figure out how to help, but I see her looking at bills late at night, and I know there's no extra money anywhere." She paused, staring into her tea. "I don't want to be like your daughter was. I don't want to take everything my mom sacrifices and then pretend I did it all myself, but I also don't know how to accept help that might hurt her." It was a question I'd never been asked directly, but one I'd been thinking about since my conversation with Jessica in the parking lot that day. How do you accept sacrificial love without being destroyed by the weight of it? How do you honor someone's gifts without being crushed by guilt or obligation? "Sarah," I said carefully, "the difference between accepting help gracefully and taking advantage of someone isn't about the money. It's about acknowledgement and gratitude, and making sure the sacrifice serves its intended purpose." We talked for over an hour about the practical aspects of her situation, but more importantly, about the emotional dynamics of family sacrifice. When she left, she hugged me tightly and promised to keep in touch about whatever decision she made. A week later, Jessica called with news that would change both our lives in ways I never could have anticipated. She'd been offered a position with the legal aid organization in Macon, but there was a complication. The job came with a requirement to live in the communities they served, to be accessible to clients who might need help outside normal business hours. "The thing is, Mom," Jessica said, her voice tentative, "they've offered me a small house to rent in Millbrook. It's part of their rural outreach program, and it would mean I'd be working primarily with families in our area." Millbrook, my hometown. The place Jessica had spent 18 years trying to escape. "How do you feel about that?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Honestly?" "Terrified and excited in equal measure. Terrified, because I'll have to face everyone who watched me grow up and knows exactly where I came from. Excited because maybe that's exactly what I need." The house Jessica rented was 6 blocks from mine, a small bungalow with a front porch and a yard that hadn't been tended in months. She moved in on a Saturday in August, and I helped her carry boxes and set up furniture in rooms that smelled like fresh paint and possibility. It was strange, watching her arrange her law books and professional certificates in a house that could have been a smaller version of the one she'd grown up in. But there was something different about Jessica now. Something settled and purposeful that hadn't been there during her college years. Her work with the legal aid organization brought her into contact with families facing eviction, workers dealing with wage theft, elderly residents being taken advantage of by predatory lenders. It was exactly the kind of work she'd dreamed of doing when she first decided to become a lawyer, and I could see how much it fulfilled her. But more than that, I could see how working in Millbrook was changing her understanding of where she'd come from. The families she helped weren't abstract concepts or statistics. They were people she'd grown up around, people whose children had attended school with her, people whose struggles were intimately familiar because they mirrored her own childhood in so many ways. One evening in September, Jessica stopped by my house after work, looking exhausted but energized. She'd spent the day helping a family avoid foreclosure on their home, a process that had required hours of paperwork and phone calls with bank representatives who seemed determined to make the process as difficult as possible. "You know what I realized today?" she said, settling into the same kitchen chair where we'd had so many difficult conversations over the years. "All those times I was embarrassed by our circumstances, all those times I wished we had more money or a bigger house or a different life, I was missing the point entirely." "What do you mean?" "I mean the strength it took for you to keep us afloat, the creativity you showed in making ends meet, the dignity you maintained even when things were hardest. That's not something to be embarrassed by." That's something to be proud of. She told me about the family she'd helped that day, about recognizing in the mother's face the same determination and fierce protectiveness she remembered seeing in me during her childhood. About understanding, finally, that poverty doesn't diminish people, it reveals their character. I spent so many years trying to distance myself from our story, Jessica continued. But our story is what makes me good at this job. I can understand these families, because I was one of these families. I can help them, because you showed me what it looks like to fight for your children, no matter what. As autumn settled over Millbrook, Jessica and I developed a new routine. Sunday dinners at my house, where she'd tell me about her cases and I'd update her on factory news and neighborhood gossip. It wasn't the relationship we'd had when she was a child, but it was something better. A friendship between two adults who respected each other and enjoyed each other's company. The breakthrough came in November, when Sarah, the young woman who'd visited me after my graduation speech, knocked on my door again. This time, she was accompanied by her mother, a small, tired-looking woman with calloused hands and worried eyes. Sarah had decided to accept a scholarship offer from the state university, but she wanted her mother to meet me first. She wanted to introduce her to someone who understood both sides of the sacrifice equation, someone who could help her navigate the complex emotions of accepting help that came at personal cost. The four of us sat in my living room that afternoon. Me, Sarah, her mother Maria, and Jessica, who had stopped by just as our conversation was beginning. We talked about the practical aspects of managing college expenses, but also about the emotional challenges of maintaining family relationships when educational opportunities create distance and difference. Maria spoke in halting English about her own childhood in Mexico, about parents who'd never learned to read but who understood the power of education. Sarah translated when necessary, but mostly we communicated through the universal language of mothers who want better for their children than they had for themselves. When they were getting ready to leave, Maria took my hands in hers and said something in Spanish that Sarah translated with tears in her eyes. She says thank you for showing her that sacrifice can be a gift instead of a burden, and that love doesn't have to be silent to be real. After they left, Jessica and I sat in comfortable silence for several minutes. Finally, she spoke. Mom, I want you to know that what happened between us, as painful as it was, it led to something important. Not just for us, but for other families who are dealing with similar struggles. What do you mean? I mean the work you're doing now, talking to parents and students about these issues. It's making a difference. Sarah's not the first person who's contacted you, is she? She was right. Over the past few months, I'd received calls and letters from parents facing similar struggles with children whose educational success had created unexpected emotional distance. I'd spoken at several community events about family dynamics and financial sacrifice. Without intending to, I'd become a resource for families navigating the complicated terrain of love and expectation and gratitude. I've been thinking, Jessica continued, about ways we could formalize what you're doing. Maybe create some kind of support network for families dealing with these issues. The idea she outlined was simple but powerful. A program that would bring together parents who were making educational sacrifices for their children, along with students who were struggling to balance gratitude with independence. Regular meetings where people could share experiences and strategies. Workshops on communication and boundary setting. Resources for managing the financial and emotional stress of educational investment. We could base it here in Millbrook, Jessica said. Start small, maybe expand to other communities if it works. The legal aid organization would support it as part of their family services program. 3 months later, we held our first meeting in the community center on Main Street. 12 families attended, representing a range of circumstances, but united by the common experience of navigating educational opportunity within financial constraint. We called the group Foundations, because that's what we were all trying to build, solid foundations for our children's futures, while maintaining the foundation of family relationships that would support them throughout their lives. The meetings became a monthly occurrence, growing steadily as word spread throughout the community. Parents talked about the practical aspects of managing college expenses, but also about the emotional challenges of watching children grow beyond the circumstances of their upbringing. Students shared their struggles with guilt and gratitude, with fitting into new environments while staying connected to their roots. Jessica and I facilitated the groups, drawing on our own experience but also on the wisdom of families who had successfully navigated these challenges. We brought in guest speakers, financial advisors, college counselors, therapists who specialized in family dynamics. But mostly, we just created space for people to tell their stories and learn from each other. 1 year after my graduation speech, Sarah visited again. This time, she was home for spring break from the state university, where she was thriving academically and socially. But more importantly, she was thriving in her relationship with her mother, whom she now called weekly and visited monthly. The difference, Sarah told me over coffee in my kitchen, is that I understand now what my mom's sacrifices mean, and she understands that accepting them doesn't make me weak or dependent. It makes me responsible. Responsible for using the opportunity she's giving me to build something meaningful. She'd chosen to major in social work, inspired partly by her own family's struggles and partly by the example she'd seen in our foundations group. After graduation, she wanted to return to the area to work with families facing similar challenges. "I want to give back to the community that raised me," she said simply. "Not because I owe a debt that can never be repaid, but because I love this place and these people and I want to be part of making things better." As I listened to Sarah talk about her plans and dreams, I thought about the journey Jessica and I had taken to reach this point. The pain of our graduation day confrontation had led to a deeper understanding of each other and ourselves. The public nature of our conflict had created opportunities to help other families avoid similar struggles. Most importantly, we'd learned that love and sacrifice don't automatically create healthy relationships. Those require honesty, communication, and mutual respect. They require acknowledging difficult truths and working through them together, rather than pretending they don't exist. That evening, as I watched the sun set over Millbrook from my front porch, Jessica joined me in the second rocking chair. We sat in comfortable silence, listening to the familiar sounds of our neighborhood settling into dusk. "Mom," Jessica said eventually, "I have something to tell you." I turned to look at her, noting the slight nervousness in her voice. "I've been offered a partnership track position at a big firm in Atlanta. Excellent salary, prestige, all the things I thought I wanted when I first started law school." My heart sank a little, though I tried not to show it. "But," she continued, "I turned it down. I realized that success isn't about impressing people I don't know with accomplishments that don't fulfill me. Success is about using my abilities to make a difference in places and with people that matter to me." She paused, rocking gently in her chair. "I'm staying in Millbrook, Mom. I'm staying because this is where I can do the most good, and this is where I want to build my life." We rocked in silence for a while longer, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. Finally, I spoke. "I'm proud of you, Jessica, not because of your job or your accomplishments, but because of who you've chosen to become." "I learned from the best," she replied, reaching over to squeeze my hand. As I sit here now, writing this story, I think about the families we work with through foundations. I think about young people like Sarah, who are learning to accept help gracefully while maintaining their independence. I think about parents who are learning to give sacrificially without creating obligation or resentment. Most of all, I think about the truth that took Jessica and me so long to understand. Real love doesn't require perfection or gratitude or even understanding. It just requires honesty, respect, and the willingness to keep trying, even when things get difficult. The money I spent on Jessica's education is gone, and I'll probably be paying off those loans for years to come. But the investment paid dividends I never expected, not just in Jessica's success, but in our restored relationship and in the opportunity to help other families navigate similar challenges. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come from our biggest mistakes. Sometimes the greatest gifts grow out of our deepest pain. And sometimes, when you're brave enough to tell the truth about your struggles, you discover that you're not alone and that your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.